organised crime groups are finding scams more lucrative than the drugs trade. That's something we've definitely seen a shift in. And even the people that are working in organised crime groups also have been scammed themselves.
Welcome back to Control Alt Lead, the podcast from computing where we talk to IT leaders at the sharp edge of strategy and technology leadership. In this episode, I'm joined by Samantha Kight, Head of Industry Security at the GSMA, which is the advocacy and lobbying organisation for the mobile industry. We're talking all about the rise in mobile scams and fraud and how you can combat it. I'll hand over to Sam to introduce herself.
Thanks so much, Tom. It's good to be here. So I'm Sam Kight, and I head up industry security at the GSMA, and that essentially means that we look after securing the mobile ecosystem globally. We do that in a few ways. We do that by providing expertise, convening the industry, and looking at future technologies, so a lot of emerging tech and that sort of thing.
Great. And I know emerging tech is a huge part of your remit, but I'd like to ironically start off by looking to the past. And I'm really interested to know how you feel the mobile scam and fraud landscape has changed in the last, let's say, year, because there have been a lot of developments there.
Absolutely. We know AI has been around for quite a while. Some people talk about it, experimenting with it in the last 20 years. But the last year in particular has been really significant. And it's actually more about an acceleration rather than a new threat landscape. It intensifies a lot of the trends that the mobile industry has been seeing and tracking for some time. And we see people using their smartphones more and more all around the world. And so that thing of digital literacy is also a key factor. And then looking at scams itself, the industrialization of scams has grown and has changed. And so with that comes the democratization of attacks, where we see sort of lower cost tools and lower level of skills being required in order to take out a lot of these scams, whether it's sort of, impersonation fraud or smishing or voice scams. A lot of these things are becoming much easier to deploy at scales. And then we're also seeing things like SMS blasters come into prominence a little bit more. We've seen it a bit in the UK. A lot of these issues are absolutely much more intensified over in the Asia Pacific region. And so there's been a big push for these SMS blasters to be banned. But it's all these things essentially just making it easier for criminals to sort of navigate all the traditional network security systems and tricking consumers and victims, essentially.
Why is that? Why is it so much more common in Asia Pacific as opposed to the UK, USA? Is that because they just use different technologies?
A lot of the scam centers are based in sort of Southeast Asia. I think they maybe some of the regulatory barriers are a bit lower there in certain regions around Asia Pac. I wouldn't say it's all of Asia Pac, but particularly in Southeast Asia. And so, but the thing is, though, because it's such a problem within that region, they're actually the most proactive, I would say. And so because they're having to face it day to day, it's, even within that region, we're seeing a huge shift in collaboration, shift in sort of their approach to technology, to, lesser access to SIM as well. I think, too, they don't have as... a lot of them still are using 2 and 3G networks as well, which does create more problems. Like the old legacy systems are more insecure. We don't have, the latest technology able to be deployed on those things. And so that probably is one of the main factors as to why.
Okay. So that's what's changing on the defender side. How about the attacker side? What are the top shifts you've seen in attacker behavior recently?
Well, I would say the biggest shift probably social engineering, so over technical exploits, because persuading someone to do something is sometimes easier than breaching a system. And the research we've carried out in Asia Pacific shows that sort of a lot of that online dating and the messaging apps are increasingly being exploited. Another thing we've seen is impersonation has become really dominant as well, where criminals are posing as banks or government bodies, executive suppliers to spoof numbers, and essentially, I think that's also been on the rise with a lot of sort of the AI technology coming in, and for them to be able to have access to those AI generated scripts. So it's just, again, that democratization as things are just becoming easier to access in a way that they never used to be before.
I was going to ask you about artificial intelligence because, of course, it's the hot topic and has been for several years now. Is that having a really large impact on the mobile fraud and scam market?
Undeniably. I think generative AI has made phishing a lot easier. Smishing, voice scams are more, convincing. It's, more at scale, and then the automation on top of all of that. So there's no doubt that AI has increased the number of scams, but it's also helped in defending scams. Like a lot of security operations centers now, a lot of them have now for a while used AI to help detect fraud and scams. And so these, while this is a problem, it's also provides a lot of opportunity for solutions within the scams world and the security world.
Okay. And in terms of the attackers, in standard enterprise security, we're seeing a huge rise in state-sponsored actors, criminal groups. Does the same apply in the mobile ecosystem, or is it largely opportunistic individual hackers?
Yeah, I often mention this UN report that came out a couple of years ago where organised crime groups are finding scams more lucrative than the drugs trade. And I think that's something we've definitely seen a shift in. And, a lot of organised crime groups are taking advantage of, they're actually tricking people to be working in these scam centres. So even the people that are working in organised crime groups, maybe forcibly, are then also have been scammed themselves in being in those situations. And so I think that level of, scale, coordination, commercial motivation has definitely been on the increase and has actually forced our industry and a lot of other industries to be collaborating cross-border and sharing intelligence to try and disrupt what is going on, on the other side.
Can you share some insights into the kind of collaboration that defenders are taking part in at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've been doing a lot of work with banks using APIs to develop things like Scam Signal, which is using a number of indicators to identify, like in real time, what sort of scams, or whether the call that the user makes to the bank or the consumer makes to the bank is actually legitimate or not. And so the mobile network operator would then have an indicator that would be flagged up to the banking operator. The banks have their own risk assessment measures, and they would then have a look and see whether they think that is fraudulent or not, and be able to act appropriately. But at a higher level, we've been engaging, with you and Interpol at the Global Fraud Summit, which was in Vienna this year. We've also been working with the Global Anti-Scam Alliance and, a lot of other organizations in order to collaborate, as well as industry verticals. So I've mentioned that banking collaboration. We also have a number of innovative we have this area within GSMA called Foundry, and they tend to do a lot of proof of concepts. So they bring together the mobile industry with other industries. And so we're doing work with big tech, to see sort of what indicators within the mobile network can we see a number travel from, our network to an app, and try and track those sorts of things and catch it in real time, or try and find the patterns in order to be able to prevent it from continuing to happen. So there's a lot of different initiatives going on at various levels and scales. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And you've talked about a variety of industries there. Are there any specific industries that are more exposed to mobile scams and fraud than any others?
I mean, I think the banking sector is the biggest. I would like the end goal is the financial gain, isn't it? And so I think it was definitely the place that we had started, and then in collaborating with other organizations, it's also about building that trust back into the mobile handset. So, we're working with, we work with a lot of startups as well to try and ensure we've got this thing called open verifiable calling. It's sort of that blue tick that you get for when you get a phone call from a particular business that, actually this is my bank that's calling me, or it is my doctor that's calling me. And that's a global solution that we're working on. So, there are a number of different areas that we're collaborating on. And that will also help the banks. That will also help those sectors that may feel a little bit more vulnerable. But yeah, for us, it is about protecting that consumer.
And as you say, sort of the financial gain is the point of these mobile scams and frauds. What then is the biggest impact on business today from the mobile scam industry? Presumably quite high in this era of BYOD.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when you work in this space, you get a lot of stories from friends who work in lots of different businesses, and you hear about, deep fakes being taken advantage of within organizations. So our app were quite open about their use case from that. If you haven't heard about it, definitely look it up. And they've been really helpful for a lot of businesses in what they had in terms of learnings around training, internal training for their businesses, and the sorts of things that people should look out for. But then you also see smaller businesses where it's just, their admin staff being tricked in thinking that the person impersonating or calling them is from their bank, and that they need to do this transaction imminently. So I think they say 1 in 2 of us have been scammed, or there's the stats out there. And I just think it's just become so much more a part of day-to-day life because, phones and our devices, we are more dependent on technology. We are more dependent on these apps. And so, it's just probably natural for us to be seeing a lot more of it, but we're trying to reduce that number and reduce that impact.
Yeah, it used to be that back when smartphones first came out, I thought, well, someone can hack my smartphone. I don't care. I haven't got anything important on there. But now I'd rather have my PC hacked than my phone. My entire life is on there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
We're all too dependent. It's a good thing. I don't know. We want to build that trust back anyway. We want to make sure that, you are protected from whatever is out there. So, and there's a lot of initiatives, like I said, and it's not just sort of us working with other industries, but it's what the operators are doing on the network. And we have this United Against Scams initiative, and it shares a lot of what the mobile industry is doing.
On the topic of defense, I think that's probably a good place to sort of round out the discussion. And I'd love it if you could share some top controls that you would advise a security leader or an IT leader to follow to strengthen, to reduce the mobile fraud risk that their organization faces.
Yeah, I think maybe in light of some of the AI frontier models that have come out, I think basic hygiene is a really good place to start. So just making sure that all the basics are in place. You've got your baseline, and that you've done that risk-based approach on what you think needs to be protected. And then I think sort of trying to be a little bit more proactive trying to get the early stage detection by finding those real-time signals. Or if you are, within the banking sector and you go, actually, I think this particular indicator would be useful for a mobile network operator to know to get in touch with us, because you may not think something of it, but that use case might be multiplied by 1,000, by 1,000,000, and how many people that's impacting. And then I think just to remember too that cyber criminals are always there to exploit gaps within supply chain. So whether that's, your own supply chain, whether that's, connections between industries. So for us, it's more, making sure that we are collaborating. We've got the latest updates where we're sharing between ecosystem partners on what some of those critical areas are, and where we can be closing the gaps that attackers exploit. So I think it's just the resilience and having layered defenses is really key here.
Okay, great. Sam, thank you so much for joining me today on Control Alt Lead. That has been a fantastic discussion. I really appreciated it.
Great. Thanks for having me, Tom.